somebody would have grabbed me, pulled me to the side and been like, look, Tupac, as soon as you step out here, they're going to be at you. If somebody would have explained it to me, I wouldn't have took the same mistakes, but I made those mistakes. And that was my job to stop somebody else from making those same mistakes, to lay it out, to lay out the real map on the world and how it is. Everything I'm saying is a warning, is a plea for help. If everybody was so goddamn worried about me, why ain't nobody came to help me? You know what I'm saying? I never wanted to be no star. This ain't my job. I don't care if everybody don't cheer for me. You know what I'm saying? If you're not cheering for me for what I'm doing, don't cheer for me. Don't cheer because you think I'm cute. You know what I'm saying? Screw that. Cheer for me for what I'm doing, for what I stand for. And when I go to jail, you should cheer louder.
The microphone did more than amplify their voices. It reflected a truth they couldn't say in daylight. That sometimes the clearest lines in a song, the offhand joke in an interview, the stanza in a late-night poem, reads back like a map toward a final exit. Tonight, we follow 10 artists who, in songs, interviews, journals, and strange little asides, seemed to look ahead and saw their own end. Some wrote it like a note. Some whispered it like a dare. Others were warning signs, patterns of behavior that screamed ahead of tragedy. And some simply made fans uneasy, like a dream you can't shake. Stay with me. At the end of this countdown, we'll pull every thread together. There's one uncomfortable truth that runs through all of their stories. And once you see it, you'll never hear their music the same way again. This isn't ghost hunting. It's not prophecy. It's a story about fame, mortality, talent, and the strange places where art and self-fulfilling grief meet. It's about the music that kept saying over and over, I won't be here long. And for these 10, the warning was tragically accurate. Mark Bolan was the glitter prince of glam. Charismatic, electric, a swaggering presence with a sliver of poet tucked under his lipstick. He was pop's sorcerer, the man who turned flamboyance into legend and made guitars glitter like gemstones. But Bolan also collected little coincidences, lines of poetry, offhand comments, and songs that, when the calendar turned to September 1977, read like a checklist.
Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night and think, in another 20 or 30 years I'm going to be 50 or 60, what shall I be doing? You don't.
I don't think I live that long.
Mark Bolan rose in the late 1960s and exploded in the early 70s with T-Rex. He had charm, he had hits. Bang a Gong, Get It On became the anthem for a generation of excess and glitter. He was on TV, covers, tours. But beneath the glitter was a recurring anxiety. Bolan was privately afraid of dying in a car crash. He refused to learn to drive for many years for that reason. He wrote poems and songs about traveling, endings, and the changing seasons. He noticed small omens, paintings, phrases, license plates, and fans later stitched these pieces into a pattern. What fans point to, songs like Celebrate Summer, with lines about summer is heaven in '77, and the eerie coincidence of his death on September 16, 1977.
You said in an interview that I read that the time that you stop working in contemporary music is getting close. Did you mean it?
Yeah.
Well, why is this time getting close?
Because I'm getting too old.
What are you, 25? 25? Quarter of a
See, it's showing. God. You'd have said I was 17 last year.
You're not getting too old.
Yeah, I think it's not really a physical.
Or solid gold easy action, with the turns of phrase that listeners read back with new weight. Or the curious detail. The license plate of the car he died in had the word Fox, and some lyrics referenced foxes. Fans love a pattern. Humans are storytellers. Coincidence becomes prophecy when you're grieving. But here's the real reporting. Bolan's last night was ordinary and tragic. Riding as a passenger in a Mini Cooper driven by his partner, the car left the road and collided with a tree. The glam poet was gone at 29. The details after the crash, the strange coincidences, the poems, the little foreshadowing lines, became myths. predict it? Maybe he feared it. Maybe he wrote about the shape of his own anxiety. Which detail feels like evidence, and which reads like hindsight? Drop a comment. Do you believe Bolan saw it coming, or did grief paint the lines? Human beings seek meaning in randomness. Artists who play with myth, who write about death, symbols, omens, hand fans a decoding kit. When the tragedy comes, the kit is used to make sense. Mark Bolan's case is less about a literal prophecy, and more about an artist whose poetry lived on the same road he feared. Jimi Hendrix rewrote the electric guitar. He braided blues, rock, and cosmic feedback into a sound that seemed to channel something larger than human hands. That talent came with a dark fascination. Hendrix spoke about death in interviews and recorded songs that, taken together, feel like an elegy. There's one small, striking detail. An early piece, The Ballad of Jimmy, recorded with Curtis Knight in the mid-60s, contains lines like, "Many things he would try, for he knew soon he'd die." Fans point to these lines and say Hendrix predicted his death years in advance. There are anecdotes, too, of Hendrix telling friends he dreamed of being dead in 5 years. His later tracks include lines like, "I'm the one that's got to die when it's time for me to die," in If 6 Was 9, an existential acceptance of mortality.
Consider yourself a dropout from society?
Not necessarily, no. Because we're making our own society. If you give us a chance. They might, I shouldn't say that. No, I'm not that dropout, man. I'm still living and breathing just like you. We just look a little different, that's all. We just have different ways of expressing ourselves.
But there's also context. Hendrix absorbed blues and mysticism. Death is a common theme in that tradition. The counterculture era, with drugs, fast fame, and long nights, made death feel closer. Hendrix's last week in London and his strange final hours reveal a life unraveling, tired and ill. On September 18, 1970, Jimi Hendrix died in London. The official cause was asphyxia related to barbiturates. He was 27. The myth grows thicker because Hendrix himself sometimes framed his life poetically. The sound of farewell was part of his music. Do you think artists who immerse themselves in myth and mortality invite tragedy? Or do we, as listeners, feed the flame by romanticizing their darkness? Jimmy's predictions are lyrical and folkloric. They're more a poet's recurring reflection on the finite nature of life than a literal premonition. But that doesn't make the lines less haunting. When you listen to the lyric and then to the date on the obituary, the pulse quickens.
Riders on the storm.
Jim Morrison was a poet who used a rock band as a megaphone. He read, he wrote, he prowled the stage like a doomed prophet. Morrison's words, in his poetry, interviews, and late-night banter, repeatedly toyed with mortality.
O great creator of being, grant us one more hour to perform our art and perfect our lives. Moths and atheists are doubly divine in dying.
Morrison's myth is complicated. He was theatrical, often deliberately courting extremity. He once joked, reportedly, that, "If I ever die, I'll probably be popped off by some loony with a gun."
I have a vision of America, seen from the air, 28,000 feet and going fast. A one-armed man in a Fresno parking labyrinth. A giant primeval bird, a burnt tree in an empty lot in Modesto. And miles of hotel corridors and elevators filled with citizens. One night in Boston, I was attacked from behind by an anxious citizen who claimed I had released the fire alarm in the entire building. What he didn't realize was that the power was out. Oh, one thing more. His wife defended him, and she was beautiful.
He wrote savage poems about death, composed a book of verses titled An American Prayer, and seemed to court the ugly romance of dying young.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
Jim's last days in Paris in 1971 were quiet, and then they were gone. Officially, he died July 3, 1971, in Paris, reportedly of heart failure, possibly exacerbated by alcohol. No autopsy was performed. But why does Morrison feel prophetic? Because he embraced the literary tradition of the doomed poet. The oeuvre, the poems and songs, reads like a final testament. Morrison's fascination with death was both artistic and real. People point to last journal entries, to the way he arranged his apartment, to poems that sound like farewells. But did he predict his death? Morrison's statements were more of a philosophical acceptance of death than a prediction of time and manner. Is Morrison's self-mythologizing, his deliberate embrace of the lone poet image, a creative choice or a harmful lifestyle? Tell us in the comments. Morrison's art fed the myth that he was a man outside the world, courting a classical artist's early death. But artistic obsession with death is older than rock. It's a literary device. Morrison lived the image, and the image swallowed him.
This is our last embrace.
Jeff Buckley's voice could hold a world in a single phrase. He was worshipped for his microphrases, a vibrato, a quiet breath, a rise and fall that felt like confession. Then he died suddenly, unexpectedly, in the quiet of the Wolf River in Memphis. What chills listeners is this: Buckley's songs are threaded with water imagery and lines about drowning. Songs like Grace contain the line, "And I feel them drown my name."
Grace is what matters in anything, especially life, especially growth, tragedy, pain, love, death. About people, that's what matters. That's a quality I admire very greatly. It keeps you from reaching for the gun too quickly. It keeps you from destroying things too foolishly. It sort of keeps you alive.
Fans heard the river and shivered. Friends later reported he had been dreaming about his own death in the weeks before he drowned. Some recall him making subtle, ominous remarks. The day he disappeared, he had been wading into the Wolf River, fully clothed, what some friends called a goofy, reckless moment. He apparently stepped into a strong current and vanished. Jeff Buckley's body was recovered days later. Evidence is part lyric, part memory. People point to Dream Brother and the recurring images of water as prophetic.
Yeah, you could play just like a half hour of the stuff that you would see and hear on the television in hell.
You have no clue what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter. Neither do they.
It's alternative. It's a completely different reality.
We'll see some more tunes right here on JBTV. Jeff Buckley in the studio, and we have a lot more coming up. Tons of stuff.
Hell, half hour. 30-minute hell. JBTV, 30 minutes in hell.
But there's also testimony. A friend said Buckley dreamt of his own death. Another said goodbye lines in his final phone messages read like goodbyes. That can read as premonitory. Which Buckley lyric haunts you the most? Share it below and say why. Buckley's death is a knot of artistry and tragedy. The water imagery was a motif, and motifs can feel like predictions when life retraces them. Buckley's case rests on lyrical resonance, dream reports, and the accidental nature of his final moments. the truth is cruel and simple. Sometimes the art is merely a mirror of the artist's inner turmoil.
All a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine, Salt and Pepper and
Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G., produced a debut album titled Ready to Die. The album is held together by its narrative, a life told from birth to the edge of death. The final track, Suicidal Thoughts, is literally a haunted pentatape monologue about ending one's life.
when I die, fuck it, I wanna go to hell, 'cause I'm a piece of shit, it ain't.
In the years that followed, when he was murdered in 1997, listeners revisited that track with a new chill. Hip-hop in the 90s used storytelling as a core device. Biggie's street narratives read like novellas. Ready to Die is a concept album with grim humor and vivid tracks.
Now, I want to get into the album. And the album is mad suicidal tendencies. And at the end, I think you commit suicide. What's that about?
Just wildin'.
Oh, word.
You know what I'm saying? Just bugging out on some.
My favorite cut on the album is the one with the red dot on the head.
That's what we shooting tonight, morning.
So, what's your favorite cut?
Everyday Struggle is my jam.
Suicidal Thoughts is radical because it's a near therapy session in song. A conversation with a friend about why the narrator wants to die, how he imagines the afterlife, and the violence and guilt he carries. Did Biggie predict his death? He certainly flirted with mortality in his work. He wrote about violence, retribution, and mortality often. But the leap from a song exploring suicidal ideation to a prophecy of being shot is a big one. People love the idea that an artist knew the script, especially when the script ends violently. But here, the pattern is more thematic. Biggie made death a character in his work. When his real-life violence mirrored his music, we read the album as premonition. Is there a difference between singing about dying and predicting it? Tell us, does art become prophecy, or does life imitate art? Biggie's Ready to Die is artful storytelling that embraced dark themes. It's not a prediction, it's an existential portrait, but it's also a sad demonstration of how violent context and music can feed each other.
And she's clinging to the nearest passerby. She's lost control.
Ian Curtis, the lead singer of Joy Division, carried a weight few understood. He suffered from epilepsy and severe depression. His lyrics gripped at existential dread. He moved like a man at the edge of himself. The band's name, Joy Division, coded a bareness in irony. These songs were anything but joyful. Curtis's decline was documented. Blackouts, seizures, marital strain, and a growing sense of despair. His performance style, strange, jerking movements on stage, read as physical manifestations of his inner disorder. In May 1980, at 23, Ian Curtis hanged himself. Did he predict his death? Not exactly, in the cinematic sense, but his music and conduct were saturated with the themes of fatalism and inevitable collapse. In private and in his journals, Curtis expressed bleak thoughts. The onstage behavior, the blackouts, and the suicide attempt or previous self-harm reported by some biographers were signals. So the prediction is not necessarily an explicit tape where he says the date. It's a pattern, a life collapsing into documented despair. What responsibility do friends and bands have when a member shows signs of crisis? Have you seen communities intentionally ignore warning signs? With Curtis, prophecy is replaced by accumulation. The warning signs were visible. Epilepsy mismanaged, depression untreated in many ways, and an industry unprepared to help. The tragedy is partly structural, how the music machine struggles to support fragile people. Kurt Cobain's life and death unravel the idea that artists can be neatly classified. He was angry, tender, self-loathing, brilliant, and exhausted by fame. Cobain left a handwritten note in April 1994 that reads like both an explanation and a goodbye. In it, he describes losing the passion for music and a fear that the spotlight was poisoning him and his daughter. He ends with pleas to keep going, and a final line, "It's better to burn out than to fade away." How does the prediction idea enter here?
I was in pain for so long that I didn't care if I was in a band. I didn't care if I was alive. I mean, I just didn't want to live.
Cobain's lyrics, interviews, and personal journals were suffused with death imagery. He had earlier written, in other contexts, lines resembling resignation.
I wish sometimes I could just enjoy the simple things in life. I'm a great father. Damn it. Aren't I? No, I love my child. It's really fun. Really fun. I had no idea. Yeah, it has. It's made me a lot more positive, you know. I have a goal now, you know. I have a child to raise, and so that gives me more reason to want to live, you know.
When the note and the death, a shotgun wound, arrived, fans and journalists pieced things together like a map. But with Cobain, there is documentary evidence, the suicide note itself, and contemporaneous reporting about his decline. There's also the cultural conversation about the 27 Club. Though Kurt died at 27, he's often seen as one of its emblematic members. We must be careful. Kurt's life had lots of turmoil, chronic stomach pain, his heroin use, and the strains of celebrity. Did Kurt predict his own death? He left many clues, but more than prediction, it was a cry for help that turned final. When talent and pain collide, do we, as fans, romanticize the outcome? Is that complicit? Certain facts are clear. Kurt Cobain wrote a note. It was discovered, and he died by suicide. The note and his life paint an inevitable, painful arc. That's not prophecy. It is a record of struggle. But it still stings. The last lines of a leading voice in a generation's soundtrack become a cultural scar. Amy Winehouse's voice was a blues lesson and a confession. She sang with jazz phrasing and a soul's moral code. She also struggled in the open. Her album, Back to Black, is essentially funeral imagery set to a Motown soul palette. The music video for Back to Black itself staged a funeral procession, an artistic choice that later became an eerie premonition. Friends and acquaintances have reported that Winehouse privately spoke about the 27 Club, and sometimes joked or admitted she might not live long, that there was a fatalism around the age 27. Her own lyrical narratives of self-medication, heartbreak, and darkness made her public decay feel like the aftermath of those songs. After her death at 27 in 2011, fans and media connected the dots, the repeated funeral imagery and videos, the drug and alcohol addiction, and her public unraveling. So, did Amy predict her death? She reportedly said she thought she might die at 27 and gave off an aura of someone resigned to a tragic fate. Some of that may be performative, a celebrity in a world that romanticizes early death. But there are also private reports of her admitting a fear she might not make it past her late 20s. Either way, the tragic alignment of art and reality is impossible to ignore. Is the 27 Club idea romantic or damaging? Share your thoughts, and if you've seen creative works that glamorize tragedy, name them. Amy's case is painful and complex. Public art fed private problems and vice versa. When an artist's aesthetic centers heartbreak, the public often misreads self-destruction for artistic authenticity, a dangerous confusion. Jared Higgins, Juice WRLD, was part of the new wave of emo rap. Raw, unfiltered, and almost alarmingly honest about drug use and despair. Two lines in his song, Legends, turned into the most quoted prediction moment in modern times.
What's the 27 club? We're making it past 21.
What's the 27 Club? We ain't making it past 21. Juice died at 21. The world paused. But to understand this, we need context. Juice's music was therapy. He freestyled entire songs about his mental state. His lyrics were confessional and often fatalistic.
Hands up in the fire. Burn, 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 burn.
In a culture saturated with online rumor, those lines took on massive weight when he died in December 2019. A medical examiner would later attribute his death to an accidental overdose after an apparent seizure.
I think that's what life is about. Truly finding yourself, and then closing your eyes and dying in your sleep.
Was it prophecy? In one sense, yes. His lyrics stated a statistic like fatalism. In the world he inhabited, where peers like XXXTentacion and Lil Peep had already died, the fear that youth was expendable was real. Legends was both elegy and warning. The real tragedy is that a pattern existed, a scene that normalized addiction and the emotional isolation of new celebrity. Do lyrics that speak about death demand intervention? If a friend wrote what Juice wrote, what would you do? Juice's case sits at the intersection of lyrical honesty and the brutal reality of early fame. It's less mystical and more a social indictment. The way systems, labels, touring schedules, existing stigma can leave vulnerable artists exposed.
You claim to be a player, but I fucked your wife. We bust on bad boys, niggas fuck.
When we talk about artists who predicted their own death, Tupac Shakur exists at the center of that conversation. He was a poet, a provocateur, and a man who spoke of violence as both a subject and a destiny. Tupac's catalog is full of premonitory lines. On Richie Rich's track Ends Done Changed, he rapped chillingly about being shot and murdered, with detailed imagery. He told friends he thought he might be killed. He performed songs that seemed to fetch details from the future. He had run-ins with the law, public feuds, and a contentious life in the spotlight.
There's no way Michael Jackson should have, or whoever Jackson, should have $1 million, $1 billion, and then there's people starving. There's no way. There's no way that these people should own planes and their people don't have houses, apartments, shacks, drawers, pants.
And then, on September 7th, 1996, he was shot in Las Vegas. He died 6 days later. So, in what way did Tupac predict his death? He didn't set a date, but he repeatedly framed death as part of his narrative, sometimes as bravado, sometimes as prophecy. Before his death, he spoke about it as an occupational hazard. Tupac seemed to understand the violence of his moment and the gravity of his enemies in a way that made some of his lyrics read like a near script. Which Tupac lyric reads the most like a message sent ahead of time? And what do you think that says about the role of a rapper, as witness, prophet, or provocateur? Tupac's prediction is perhaps the most literal. He described scenarios of his murder with unnerving clarity in songs and interviews. But the important takeaway is not mysticism, it's context. Tupac lived in a landscape of extreme rivalry and very real danger. His words were a mix of bravado, reportage, and fatalistic artistry. The consequence was fatal. Here's the reveal we promised at the top. When artists appear to predict their deaths, it often reveals more about the society around them than any mystical foresight. The prophecy is frequently a symptom, a signal of systemic neglect, cultural romanticization of pain, and the intense pressures placed on creative people. These 10 stories are not just about eerie coincidences. They are about what happens when talent collides with addiction, with untreated mental illness, with brutal fame, and with an industry that values output over health. They also show how we, the audience respond with fascination, with myth-making, with a hunger to turn tragedy into narrative. If there's a call to action here, it's not mystical, it's practical. We must build structures that protect artists. We must destigmatize mental health. We must stop tasting the blood of tragedy like a vintage and calling it authenticity. And if you're a fan, if you hear an artist talk about death, don't just intersect that in a lyric thread on a forum. Take it seriously. Reach out. Remind someone that the music is better when the artist is still with us to make it.